I mean, financialization in the very limited sense just refers to the way that financial capital takes on more and more of a hold over the capitalist economy. The way I use financialization is to understand it as a cultural and social process, which is the way finance infiltrates its way into everyday life in more and more profound and insidious ways. So for instance, the fact that we're all now in incredible debt, that we live our lives under the shadow of credit, that we increasingly are forced to imagine all parts of our lives as investments. So education is no longer a social good, it's an investment in the future. We have to understand all of our lives as sort of cost-benefit analysis.
Now, America's biggest debt burden is now on the shoulders of people who have yet to even start a career. The money owed on student loans now outstrips the nation's credit card debt as the #1 financial problem. And a surging unemployment rate of nearly 10% is only likely to worsen the situation. RT's Anastasia Cherkina has been to meet some of those badly hit by the crisis.
A ticking time bomb of American debt. This time, all this is owed by college students. $3,000 adding on every second.
If I keep going at the rate that I went the first year, by the time I'm finished, I will have about $120,000 worth of debt, just from school loans.
The most traditional financial baggage dragging behind for Americans has been credit card debt. For the first time, debt belonging to college students has taken over that #1 spot.
Students graduating in 2008, 2009, and 2010 are facing the worst job markets in a generation at least. And so you have people who have more debt than we've ever seen before and are having a harder time finding any job, let alone a job that pays them enough to somehow pay off all this debt.
29-year-old Shayna is haunted by major money problems. What she earns now is barely enough to survive on a day-to-day basis, let alone pay back for her education.
The money that comes from the internship is, like I said, very little and doesn't pay for much. It'll pay for maybe a dinner or two.
The connection between lack of a good enough, if any, job and growing debt has never been as tight for graduates. According to some reports, at certain American universities, students have been borrowing 70% more money in the last year.
The universities are actually cutting deals with the student loan companies and making money on the side. There's been a lawsuit in New York, $1 million fine against Columbia University for steering people to expensive loans. The danger here is that instead of capitalism, we end up with serfdom because these students are kind of indebted for life.
So financialization in a limited sense just refers to what's going on with the preponderance of speculative capital within the general share of different types of capital in a capitalist economy. In a broader sense, though, it has to do with the way finance is totally reorganizing our society. In an age where where major corporations own practically everything, and those themselves are tied into the financial markets as never before. Well, I think primarily what financialization does is it changes our social notion of what's possible and what the future might hold. Because if our future is always colonized by finance, in the sense that we're always thinking about, we never have a chance to think about new social projects, we're just thinking about debt. We're constantly haunted by this sense that our future is already foreclosed, by, our personal levels of debt, by government levels of debt. Governments are constantly talking about just paying down deficits, paying down debts. There's no broader social vision that's possible, or very little social vision that's possible. And sort of the future, our individual futures and our social futures really narrow to this sort of endless now of neoliberal exploitation without end. I think in that circumstance, unfortunately, there's a number of very negative effects on how people imagine resistance. First of all, most people imagine resistance as completely futile, and that's partly just because of that existential experience of debt and financialization that means that we have a hard time envisioning what the future might look like. I think, so that's on the one side. On the other side, we have a general mass forgetting of past movements, how they got out of situations much like this. But thirdly, I think there's another tendency, which is even more worrisome in some senses, which is that when we have this sort of the future collapsing to this endless now, we get really bad forms of resistance that are very gestural, and they're very much based in just trying to get a reaction out of the forces of the state.